You walking into a room where people may dislike you, but none of them dare disrespect you. They may compete with you. They may envy you. Some may even secretly hope for your failure. But when you speak, they listen. When you act, they watch carefully. And when your name is mentioned, no one laughs, because even your enemies understand one thing. Crossing you would be a mistake. This kind of respect is rare, not the shallow respect people show out of politeness, but the cold, calculated respect born from power and psychological dominance. 500 years ago, one man understood exactly how this worked. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli, and in his infamous political manual, The Prince, he revealed a brutal truth about human nature. Respect is not given to the kindest person. It is given to the person people believe they cannot control. And once you understand this principle, you start seeing the world very differently, because the people who command respect are not always the loudest, not always the strongest, and certainly not always the nicest. Instead, they follow a few quiet psychological rules that shape how others perceive them. Rules most people never learn. The dark premise. Machiavelli observed something deeply uncomfortable about human behavior. Most people claim they value kindness, fairness, and humility, but in reality, they instinctively respect strength, boundaries, and unpredictability. In Renaissance Italy, rulers who tried to be universally loved often lost their power quickly. But rulers who projected controlled strength were treated with caution, even by their enemies. Why? Because humans are wired to evaluate risk. When someone appears harmless, people test them. They interrupt them. They push their boundaries. They take advantage. But when someone appears dangerous to disrespect, something changes. People become careful, measured, strategic. This doesn't mean they like you, but it does mean they respect you. And Machiavelli believed this distinction was critical, because love is fragile, but respect, especially the respect of rivals, can stabilize power. The first psychological principle: controlled emotions. One of the fastest ways to lose respect is surprisingly simple: emotional predictability. When people can easily trigger your anger, frustration, or insecurity, they gain psychological control over you. Machiavelli noticed that powerful leaders rarely reacted emotionally in public, not because they lacked emotions, but because they understood something subtle. Emotion is information. Every visible reaction tells others where your weaknesses are. Imagine two men being insulted. The first explodes immediately. His voice rises. His face turns red. He argues aggressively. The second man barely reacts. He listens. He pauses. He smiles slightly, then calmly changes the subject. Which man appears more powerful? The first man revealed exactly how to control him. The second man revealed nothing. This creates a psychological effect known as uncertainty pressure. Humans feel uncomfortable around people they cannot easily read. It forces others to think twice before provoking them again. Machiavelli understood that mystery increases authority. The less predictable your emotional reactions are, the more people treat you carefully. The second principle: boundaries create status. Another dangerous myth about respect is the belief that being agreeable earns approval. In reality, excessive agreeableness signals something else: low negotiating power. Machiavelli noticed that leaders who constantly tried to please everyone lost authority quickly. Because the moment people realize you will always compromise, they stop respecting your limits. But when someone defends their boundaries calmly and consistently, something changes. People begin to categorize them differently, not as someone who seeks approval, but as someone who operates by their own rules. This psychological shift is subtle, but powerful, because the moment people believe you cannot be easily pressured, they start treating your decisions with weight, even when they disagree. The paradox of respect. Here is the paradox Machiavelli understood better than most philosophers. Trying too hard to be liked often destroys respect, but people who quietly prioritize strength over approval often end up respected, even by those who dislike them. This is why history repeatedly shows a strange pattern. Some leaders are admired, others are feared, but the most psychologically effective leaders create something in between: reluctant respect. The kind of respect enemies feel when they realize underestimating you would be dangerous. And Machiavelli believed this effect was not accidental. It could be engineered through reputation, through behavior, through carefully controlled displays of power. But the most dangerous rule he described was the one that determined whether people would challenge you or avoid crossing you entirely. And once you understand this rule, you begin to see why some individuals command respect in every room they enter, while others are constantly ignored. Because respect, Machiavelli argued, ultimately depends on one brutal perception. What happens if someone decides to test you? Because in every social hierarchy, whether it's a medieval court, a corporate boardroom, or a modern social circle, people are constantly running silent calculations. Who can be challenged? Who can be ignored? And who should never be underestimated? Once someone believes there are no consequences for disrespecting you, something subtle but irreversible begins to happen. Small dismissals appear, interruptions, jokes at your expense. Your opinions slowly carry less weight, and eventually, people stop taking you seriously at all. But Machiavelli observed that individuals who command lasting respect follow one crucial rule. The third principle: reputation is a shield. In his writings, especially in The Prince, Niccolò Machiavelli argued that power does not rely only on what you do. It depends heavily on what people believe you are capable of doing. This is reputation, and reputation acts like a psychological shield, because when someone is considering whether to challenge you, they rarely analyze the full truth. Instead, they rely on stories and patterns they have observed. If your reputation suggests you tolerate disrespect, people will test you again. If your reputation suggests you defend your boundaries decisively, people hesitate. Machiavelli saw this repeatedly in Renaissance politics. Rulers who punished challenges swiftly and visibly were rarely challenged again. But rulers who ignored insults or threats often faced constant rebellion. This doesn't mean reacting to every small offense. In fact, Machiavelli believed that would look weak. Instead, powerful individuals do something more strategic. They allow minor things to pass until they encounter a moment where a clear line must be drawn. And when that moment arrives, their response is decisive enough that no one forgets it. One moment of unmistakable strength can shape a reputation for years. The fourth principle: unpredictability creates authority. Most people behave in ways that are easy to predict. They always try to be polite, always try to avoid conflict, always try to keep the peace. On the surface, this seems admirable, but psychologically, it creates vulnerability. Because once people know exactly how you will react, they know how far they can push you. Machiavelli advised rulers to avoid being completely predictable. Not chaotic, but strategically unpredictable. Sometimes generous, sometimes firm, sometimes silent, sometimes decisive. This unpredictability creates what psychologists call risk uncertainty. If someone cannot accurately predict your reaction, they become cautious around you. Think about the difference between two leaders. One leader always forgives mistakes. The other leader is fair, but occasionally extremely strict. Which leader's authority feels stronger? The second. Because people instinctively calculate risk, they think, if I cross this person, I'm not sure what will happen. That uncertainty protects their authority. The final Machiavellian insight. But Machiavelli's most uncomfortable insight about respect may be the one modern culture dislikes the most. He wrote that rulers must choose carefully between being loved and being feared. Ideally, he said, a leader should be both. But if forced to choose, fear is more reliable than love. This line is often misunderstood. Machiavelli did not mean cruelty or tyranny. What he meant was far more psychological. Love depends on emotion. Emotion changes. People love you when things are going well, but when pressure rises, loyalty disappears. Fear, however, depends on consequences, and consequences are predictable. If people believe disrespecting, you will cost them something. They behave differently. But Machiavelli warned of a critical balance. Fear must never turn into hatred, because hatred creates enemies willing to destroy you. The ideal position is something much more subtle. A position where people may not always like you, but they recognize that crossing you is a very bad idea. That is the territory of reluctant respect. The final truth. Once you begin understanding these principles, you start noticing them everywhere. In politics, in business, in social hierarchies. The people who command the most respect often share a few quiet traits. They control their emotions. They enforce boundaries. They protect their reputation. And they remain just unpredictable enough that no one feels comfortable testing them. Not because they are loud, not because they demand attention, but because others sense something instinctively, a quiet calculation happening in the back of their minds. If I disrespect this person, it will not end well. And when people reach that conclusion, something fascinating happens. You may not win everyone's affection, but you gain something far more powerful. Even your enemies begin to respect you.